Hello, everyone, and greetings. Today is Tuesday, April 17th, 2018, and this is the weekly meeting of Kubernetes Sig Docs. Let me find the agenda. Do we have any new contributors? Anybody here for the first time? Nope, everybody looks pretty familiar. All right, let's move on to updates and reminders. Let's see, rotations for the PR Wrangler. Joe, I noticed that you updated the gist for the PR Wrangler. Is there anything you want to say about that, or is the gist self-documenting?
It's fairly self-documenting. The biggest thing to note is that there's been more PRs recently that have come in against the generated content. So having to make some explicit mentions to them, hey, don't modify it here, go upstream, here's where to go. In a couple of them, I tried to find the source for them and help guide them. Not exactly an easy process because everywhere seems to be different, but more of that's coming in. So just be aware of it as more people hit into our site and try to do updates.
Awesome, thank you. Let's see. All right, I think that's the only update and or reminder. So let's move to the agenda. So as a reminder, our first ever Sig Docs Summit is coming up on Wednesday, May 9th in Portland. And May 9th is the day, it's a Wednesday immediately after Write the Docs in Portland. Plan this in mind with the idea that folks could stick around an extra day if you're coming to Write the Docs. And I have opened an issue that includes our tentative agenda, and that includes map links for both where the summit itself will be held and for where we're going to head for dinner after the summit is done. So if that issue looks reasonably complete, or if there's anything that you see that's missing there or could be added, please feel free to comment and make changes. But that's the issue that we're going to use for the summit. And just to cover briefly, the summit is our chance to get to know each other and to set common priorities and goals through the rest of the year, and to make sure that we are agreed on what it is that matters most for Sig Docs, and that we are able to base our future decisions about what we take on and what we either say no to or defer to for later based on our shared priorities. And the summit is where we're going to do that work of making sure that we have clarity about what our shared goals are for the rest of the year. And one of the last things that we'll do at the summit is set our date for 2019, so that when we do this again next year, we're not already halfway through the year. So any questions about the Sig Docs Summit?
I have a question. Is there any pre-work we should do?
Any pre-work we should do? What an interesting question, Jared. Do you have anything in mind?
Not yet. Just waiting for permission.
No permission needed. This is a collaborative SIG.
All right. I might think of something, but yeah, just wondering if you had any initial thoughts.
For pre-work, I would say come in with a sense of think about what matters most for this SIG. If you had to boil down the work that we do in this SIG to what matters the most, how would you express that to others in terms of the most valuable work that we do? And think about that and come in with that in mind. All right, if you have any other questions about the Sig Docs Summit, please leave a comment in the issue, and we can address questions and concerns there. All right, a few notes from the Joe. Do you want to say more about the PRQ, or did we cover what you wanted to cover? All golden. Okay, let's move on. Let's see. All right, so about a week and a half ago, our Netlify test build began to fail inexplicably. And one of our, someone within the SIG, Qiming Tang, who's based out of China and doesn't regularly attend this meeting because it's at a terrible time for him, was able to figure that out. But it was there was a change to pod security policy, and it was a very unexpected change. So we were able to fix it, and that's a credit to Qiming, but there's an open question about why did this break, and why did we discover it in the breaking? Jennifer, do you want to say more about that?
Well, I can lead the discussion, but I don't know all of the technical details. So pod security policy changed in version 1.10, and that's well documented everywhere. The salient piece of information for our purposes is the test harness that the Netlify build runs, well, the tests that it runs, that whole test harness clearly upgraded to 1.10 overnight, the night that break happened, right? So the issue isn't so much that the pod security policy endpoint changed groups in the API. The issue is, although that was the symptom and the thing that we needed to fix, the issue is that the test harness is getting version updates and we're not in the loop about that. So if we've made that change, like, if we thought, okay, pod security policy changed with 1.10, we need to change the test script for 1.10, we'd have been breaking before that, if you see what I mean. Right?
Yes.
So what we need is information about the testing framework upstream and when it changes. And I don't know whether, I took a look at the Travis error. I took a look at the change that Qiming made. I took a look at a couple of other files, and I'm sorry it was last week, and that's like a century ago. But what I noticed is I don't know whether we can put variables in there and declare the dependencies explicitly. I'm not sure how we would fix this technically, but I was hoping that maybe folks with more of a history of setting up the tests might know where the framework lives that we run the tests on and how we might communicate better with framework changes, version changes, right? Did that make sense? If we want to fix this going forward structurally, I think that's the problem we need to fix, or the issue we need to address.
So I'm just, I think that I understand, but I'm going to play the role of the village idiot for only 20 seconds. Don't anyone judge or extrapolate beyond that, please. So do I understand correctly that, yes, well, I guess the question is who owns our Travis infrastructure, and who makes those changes and who announces those changes are coming?
Well, and it's not, I think, just our Travis infrastructure, but the testing framework that Travis is running against, right?
Sure. So is that test infra that we talked to about that?
I don't know. Andrew, I'm wondering, you were the last person who touched the files that I looked at. Do you have any insight here?
Yeah, I would first talk to test infra. I don't remember them explicitly doing stuff on that recently, but
well, my guess is that upgrading versions is something that they rotate through, various, I'm not sure what, branches, whatever, clusters, on a regular basis. Presumably they're providing different versions as versions roll out, right? You note I'm making lots of assumptions here, but I think some of them are reasonably valid to explore.
Just based on the general thrust of this conversation, it seems like we don't know who owns this infrastructure anymore. So we're kind of sitting with the dependency on this alien artifact. So I know that Paul Whitrock originally worked on a lot of this content. And I know that some other folks in the test infra group have as well. So it might be useful for us to reach out to them and say, like, who is maintaining this, and who do we contact in the future if we have an issue?
So I reached out to Phil Whitrock about this issue specifically, and he sort of shrug emojied at me and said, "Do I own this? Is there anything in this that I own?" And he seemed genuinely not to know.
Yeah, well, he owned it like a year and a half ago, and then went on maternity leave. Sorry, paternity leave. So yeah, it's like the dim, dark past.
Sure.
I don't know. Did you uncover anything from that? From your conversation with him? Did you uncover anything from your?
No, he didn't. Yeah, he gave a goose egg in terms of knowing anything about the breaking change. Joe, you got your hand raised.
Yeah, to call out that those tests, nobody else owns them. It's us. We've inherited them. Actually knows the tests. I think that's the fundamental problem. And something that those tests depended on upstream is what changed. I don't know if it was a client. I haven't read them, grok the code myself, so I'm not in a position to make any assertions about it. But I think that's fundamentally what we need to sort out. We need to get more familiar with those tests and be able to own that ourselves. And then as upstream changes happen, we need some way of being aware of it.
So I did take a look at the paths, the pod security policy paths in the tests. Those are definitely upstream, and something changed the version that's getting built and served that those tests are calling into. Okay, that's what I meant by test infra. So we own the tests, but the tests are running against a live Kubernetes API server we don't own or control.
Yeah, and I guess my goal would be to find out who does own that and request notification of future changes, just to make sure that that we are in the loop for downstream effects.
Yeah, this is definitely, I clearly hadn't thought it all the way through either. Definitely sounding like something to take to test infra. I'm happy to take second on that. I'd be happy to take the lead, but I'm beyond buried in Heptio projects this week.
Sure. So is there someone who does feel comfortable taking the lead to approach test infra?
I can do that.
Awesome.
Andrew, you understand what I've been saying about the tests and the API server, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I agree, Joe. Any significant API aggregation or endpoint changes in the future will absolutely have an effect on this kind of thing. Awesome. Thank you, Andrew.
But it does bring up the other issue, which is the tests themselves, because that is sort of like an alien artifact, because it had been inherited, and then whenever it would break, we would go find an engineer to like make changes, and they would fix it. So there hasn't been a consistent owner for the actual tests, and we've just been making modifications here and there, but no specific person owns the tests themselves.
That's fair. So I suppose that we need to find or create a clear owner for our own tests.
At the risk of getting voluntold for something down the road, seems to me like we might, instead of, we want to investigate the history of the tests that we've got, but when I was looking at them, and I sort of stuck this in the chat, they seemed like an odd sort of grab bag. It's like, okay, I can see why we're testing pod security policy, but why aren't we testing all the other related Kubernetes objects? Maybe there are reasons, but there's no indication of those reasons in the tests. And I'm wondering, just tossing out an idea here, whether it would be useful to, we need to find out about test info and what's going on right now, but also maybe think a bit about what we think optimal tests would look like. right?
Right.
It's a testing requirements document.
Sure. I was thinking about that. It's like, what particularly do we need to test for documentation that differs meaningfully from other repositories tests, from other SIG tests? And I'm not sure that I can articulate what about our special sauce other than other than our CI/CD stack that we need to be validating.
Some things out of these things cause the test to fail over to these things get logged but don't cause the test to fail, and then we can look at the logs once a week. Like this thing that we're talking about. I haven't been studying this, so I'm not up on it, but just the idea that an upstream dependency might cause a test to fail. It'd be nice if we could see that in the log rather than having it break us for a few days.
Right. Just have some sort of verbose error associated with it. But then again, that comes down to, I think, asking upstream for better notification and better publicity.
It occurs to me that the types of things that we would need to test for our docs specifically are radically different from the types of things that would be tested for upstream dependencies and things like that. Like the problem that I'm working on in the release 110 branch right now is potentially a sort of thing that we would want to test the docs for. Some of those things we test using Netlify, because if the Netlify build fails, then we know there's a problem. But surprisingly, this thing didn't cause Netlify to fail. But this seems like orthogonal to the types of tests that you guys are seeing failing, which have much more to do with Kubernetes itself.
Right. So I think there's a more nuanced discussion to be had here. One about, I see two discussions. One is about better notification of changes to upstream testing framework, and one is about owning our own tests, our own tests that are specific to Sig Docs. And Andrew has already said that he'll go talk to upstream. Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. And then we need to have the conversation about owning our own tests and about making sure that our own test stack, one, that we well understand it, and two, that the test that we have makes sense. Because yes, Misty, the thing that you ran into with conflict markers merged didn't cause Netlify to fail, but it has certainly made a giant mess. So I'm trying to think about what next steps here look like, and I suppose that looks like finding someone with the knowledge and the bandwidth able to take on a kind of test ownership role. So that might be a discussion that we have to defer. It's not immediately pending, but I don't know. Jared, what do you think?
I think it's something like, there's no clear group that comes to mind immediately of who should own this. So that makes it tough. And also we're in the midst of a huge migration. So building a new
not the time.
Right now seems like a bad idea. So I agree with deferring this decision down the road, but it's definitely something we need to make. It's something we should at least start down the path on in a couple weeks.
Agreed. So, all right, let's defer.
That doesn't mean we shouldn't. I see a lot of chats saying like, yes, this is definitely something we should think about. I completely agree. But let's find like a good set of owners and maintainers for this.
As for it being a good agenda item for the summit, Jennifer, I don't know. That kind of discussion could easily eat a large portion of the day.
Very true.
I think that would be a really good discussion. I think maybe a dedicated discussion to testing after the summit, after the migration, as we get close to the end of 1.11, and as we start looking at the bandwidth, as we start approaching the lull for 1.12. At the very start of 1.12, I think that might be a good time to have the conversation about changing test infrastructure. Just for timing, but for now, let's defer discussion. It is very important, and it's something that we need to take action on, but now is not the right time to do that. So let's defer until, let's say, at least the 1st of June. All right. Let's move on from the pod security policy and testing change to talk more about specifically the release-1.10 branch and the giant sort of mess of merge conflicts there. I can give a little bit of background, unless Misty, you would rather give the background and the current context for it.
I don't really have the background for what happened. It seems like there was like one scary commit that was part of a bigger merge commit that caused problems, and it seems like there were people who were, I know, Zach, you said that you sort of doubted that the problem that you were seeing was the real problem, and you just thought maybe it was Adam being weird. But yeah, I mean, I don't know the history behind what happened, but the effect of what happened is that a lot of files, like 30+ files in 1.10, are in a really strange state with conflict markers committed along with the text. So and therefore, master can't be merged into 1.10 right now until we get it into a more consistent state. So
I'm sorry, Misty, to interrupt, but yeah, just to give that context, I went in as part of being the 1.11 release meister, went to merge master into release 1.10 yesterday and discovered a whole bunch of merge conflicts. And Misty is delving on causes, but that is, Misty's summary is correct, that we can't really proceed with adding anything into release 1.10. We can't merge master into release 1.10 until the current state of conflicts is resolved. So I'm sorry to interrupt, Misty, please continue.
And we have multiple ways that we can try to resolve it. My inclination is to try to resolve it the quote unquote right way, which involves fixing that bad commit, and which like effectively interactive rebasing, starting with that bad commit. But there are 592 commits on top of that commit, which not all, of course, have new conflicts based on fixing that commit, but enough of them have small little conflicts as I'm going that I'm having to walk back up through. So right now I'm on 317 out of 593. There's an alternative approach that I have not tried that somebody else could potentially try on the side, which is to look at all the commits that have gone into master since the 1.10 release and figure out which ones of those commits are not appropriate to be in 1.10. And then we could effectively hard reset the release 1.10 branch as master and then pick out those commits that we don't want. It seems like in a way that may be easier, but that would require somebody who actually knows the differences between 1.10 and the current state of master, and that's not me. So that's why I'm trying to do it the way that you would need to do if you don't necessarily know the history, but I'm happy for somebody else to try that at the same time. I'm not pushing anywhere. When I get this branch into a consistent state, I'm going to push it up into my fork and let people look at it. We could look at it making a PR between it and the release 1.10 just to see the differences, to make sure that I made the right choices.
So I don't know of anything that's in master that should not be in 1.10. Does anybody else know of anything like that?
I had Misty, when you made that proposal, I went through and I thought about it too. And the thought that immediately came to mind and that has stayed with me is that there are ideally every commit that is in master should also be in 1.10.
Okay, then it's possible that the work that I'm doing is silly and we should just hard reset the release 110 branch to master, because that would also get us into a consistent state.
I'd be in favor of saving you the work and doing that.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to propose that without having enough information. It's the less safe way to do it. The other thing that we could do is we could tag. We already have a tag that Zach made. I think, Jennifer, you also didn't tag or didn't push the tag for the 110.
That's exactly correct.
So Jared made one Zach made one yesterday, but it's also it's the tag SHA is the one that's screwed up. It's the one that I started working on. So we do have that to fall back to. It's tagged, so it's not going anywhere. If we did this, we would want to make another tag for 110. Every time you make a tag, it's something that's never going to get garbage collected, it's a state that you can get back to if you ever needed to. So whatever we do, we would need to have an extra tag in case it was the wrong decision and we needed to go back and change our minds later on.
That seems reasonable. I mean, I definitely wouldn't, for something as significant as this, for that kind of a change in the history, having a permanent marker would be a really good idea.
So I can walk you through, whoever is going to do the work, I assume it's going to be you, Zach. I can walk you through if you need help doing the hard reset of the release 1.10 onto the current status of master.
I will gladly accept the help.
It looks like yesterday you were saying that it doesn't look like you can force push into the upstream, which is sort of unfortunate because I don't think we can actually do this kind of work using a pull request. Or maybe we can and I'm wrong, but it's not going to be a pretty pull request at all.
That might require us to engage in some unclean behavior and allow force pushing for the branch temporarily.
Yeah, wait, which branches do you need to force push to?
It would be the release -1.10 branch that we would need to temporarily open and then close as soon as we did our dirty work.
Okay, Zach, you have access to turning off the branch protection, right?
I do.
Effectively, though, until we get this sorted out, nobody should be. I mean, people can make pull requests against the release 1.10 branch, but it's probably not a great idea. It's probably not a great use of anyone's time. And if anybody who's not on this call does that, we will probably need to help them getting their PRs back into a good state after we do the work.
Well, at this point, no one should be doing any changes to the release 1.10 branch because, I mean, effectively, master is the canonical 1.10, and we're just merging it back into release 1.10 as a snapshot. So no one should be doing any work on that except for like you two.
Yep.
Okay, well, let's circle back on it after the call then. I think we have a plan.
Sounds good. Dude. Thank you, Misty. And really, thank you for all of your help with this. Your expertise and your contributions have been invaluable in this. I'm just sorry that you've had to go through it.
That's all right.
Thank you.
I've been able to see just about every file that you guys work on much, so that's been informative.
All right, let's move on. Okay, so quick takeaways. I'm sorry, before we move on from the breaking release 1.10, I think it's also important to talk a little bit about why it was broken. And in this case, it looked particularly broken. I think, Misty, correct me if I'm wrong, but because there were unresolved conflict markers that had been merged into some files and caused a great deal of confusion. Is that correct, Misty?
Yeah, that's correct. My supposition, the way that I could imagine it getting into this state, just from a technical point of view is that somebody had a situation with a terrible number of conflicts that needed to be resolved, and they maybe lost their place, went to lunch, or maybe they kind of freaked out and they did a git add star or something like that and just added all the conflicted files without resolving the conflicts. That would be my supposition. If you do a git status and you see both modified or anything like that, anything other than just your straight modified things that you expect to see, that's probably not something that you should do. But I can also understand that if somebody was in the heat of the moment and they were in a hurry or they lost track of what they were doing, maybe they would forget where they were. There's some mitigation strategies that we can put in place. We can develop some pre-commit hooks to try to prevent this sort of thing from happening. Pre-commit hooks are on the client side, so it's incumbent upon the person to install them into their local repo. It's not really enforceable. The other thing we can do is I have some helper things in my environment that I'm happy to share that mean that I don't lose my place. I've got some things like I've got a customized bash prompt and some other stuff like that that really helps me not to get lost, and I'm super happy to share that stuff. It's a little bit more advanced than a lot of people want to get to. It's probably not something for a meeting like this. It's maybe something a little bit more for a tech talk, or maybe something at in Portland or something like that, where I can just show people what it looks like and how it benefits me. But yeah.
Okay. Yes, let's consider those as future possibilities for more automated checking. For now, if you do any kind of merge PR at all, just be very, very careful about unresolved merge conflicts, and please make sure that you're not merging conflict markers into existing files.
I would say that if you're confused or concerned or stressed about anything in the state of the thing that you're working on, in my experience, it's better to ask for help, because with Git, like anything that you do that's a misstep is just going to make things 10 million times worse, especially if you're not super comfortable with what you're doing. It's super easy to get into a strange state.
Yep. So yeah, ask for help. It is, like Misty says, just so much better to ask for help in advance of blundering through. I blunder through, and as part of being the release meister yesterday, I blundered farther than I should have alone. And Misty is a great resource, but there are other resources as well that you can reach out to for help.
In my experience, merging as a workflow makes all this stuff way harder to debug, because merging sort of does a whole bunch of operations at once instead of doing them in sequence. And it becomes a little bit more difficult to tease out exactly what went wrong and where.
It sounds honestly like we could really benefit from having a Git specific tech talk at some point in the future.
Which I absolutely agree with. And I said something to this effect in one of the public Sig Docs channels. I need to add some more information to the friction doc. But as the person who I believe is responsible for the commit in question, at least I know that there's an ugly PR with a commit that I seem to be responsible for. We probably need to develop, especially for release docs meisters, a clear sort of ask for help strategy. Because when Zach asked me about the pull request in question yesterday, I went back and looked at my Slack DMs just because I remembered talking about this particular pull request. And it was one of those perfect storm of things I can look back and say, okay, I could have asked a different group of people, or I could have asked a group instead of an individual, and I should certainly have put a hold on the PR until I was satisfied with its state, because I recall being bewildered by it. But I think that there's a bunch of things that we can try to document for helping people get through this, in addition to, yes, please, the Git Tech Talk.
Agreed.
And I don't think anybody's blaming you. at all.
I don't.
This
I'm
is a,
doing my damnedest to take this as an opportunity to learn lessons, because there will always get lessons to be learned. But the thing I'm hearing you say, Misty, that I felt sort of intuitively during my tenure as Docsmeister for 110 was that there was a quite desperate communication confusion around a merge workflow versus a rebase workflow also, which is one of the reasons I was so grateful that you brought it up and that we are moving toward clarity and coherence around this, because without understanding exactly what I'm saying, I'm pretty sure that merge plus merge with some PRs and rebase with other PRs is part of what contributed to the mess.
Well, it sounds like having a Git tech talk and yeah, having better understanding overall and clearer and more consistent practices is going to help a lot going forward. All right, let's move on to external content. So Raji raised in the channel yesterday, she pointed to a particular article that she found helpful and asked if we can include it in the site, if we could link to it. And that, I think, is a great question to talk about. Is what should we do? What can we do with helpful external content? I have some thoughts, but I am really curious to hear to hear whether other folks have thought about this as well.
I think it's fine to link to external content. We do a fair amount of it already. I can't, off the top of my head, point to it, but I know we do it. And, my thought is there's way more that needs to be said than we have time to say. So we should make use of whatever we find out there.
I think that we want to be careful about how we incorporate links and content, though. Like linking out to this particular topic seems fine. I think including it doesn't, for the specific reason that it looks more like an implementation of one of those infinite number of Kubernetes things that's so flexible that you have to go figure out how to implement it. You can't just use it out of the box. And that's good. I mean, we all, everybody needs that kind of content. But we've had conversations in the past about keeping the docs about what Kubernetes does, and then pointing people to, well, here's where you go to figure out how to, for examples of, A, B, or C. Did that make sense? If I recall correctly, this one was about ingress, which is a particularly thorny thing.
In terms of hosting external content on the site, I am adamantly against it. I can point to that for a number of reasons. I don't want to get into a situation where either we are paying other people or they are paying us to host their content. I don't want to get in the business of hosting content and serving as a duplicate source for the same content. I would like to avoid any content strategy that incorporates that incorporates external content in a way where we have to maintain it. I am a little reluctant. I'm fine to link out to other content, but I would also like to make sure that we have some way of verifying that external links, or whether external links are broken, and having a way to verify that they're still good, and if not, give content owners the chance to update or remove those links. Joe, you are muted.
Yeah, not anymore now. Just for the sake of the record, there is content that we are including on our site from an external site today that has proven problematic, and we've done our best to resolve it, but it continues to lurk out there, and that's everything that's going on with the Katacoda tutorials It's incredibly useful, so I'm not saying get rid of it, but this is a place where we've definitely seen the pain of including external site into our content and not having a very clear structure of how to deal with it outside of that.
Yes, and a lot of the content, almost all of the content in the getting started section, what's currently labeled setup on the site, is content that is specific to external providers and is likewise problematic. So, Raji, I suspect that we're wandering a little far from your proposal, which is what do we do with helpful content? I don't know. What do folks think of the idea of having some discoverable page for external content that you may find helpful? So in essence, it would be, what do folks think about curating a section of helpful external content and isolating it and identifying it as such? Is that something that folks think is worthwhile?
I think so I liked your first question, which was open-ended, and then it converged into a yes or no question, which I didn't like.
Erase the second question. Let's go back to the first.
Because I think the suggestion is actually really good. So thank you for bringing it up, Raji. I think we need to come up with a good strategy for where to land this content, because some of it should just be blog posts, and we reach out to the person who wrote this content and ask them if we can like re-syndicate it or point to it, or so some of this is more like signal boost. And then there's other I struggle to think of like deep technical content or maybe like a community contribution that we would want to include. And we should think of like how to include that into our sites in a way that makes sense. I've seen other like larger cloud sites like Azure and Google and AWS figure out how to do this with the community portal. And I think it makes sense for us to consider doing something similar, because I would hate to include external content, but have it look like our sort of the content that we create on our own. So I think that's my concern, because we vet things and we vet and polish and maintain the content, and we have a certain standard, and the external content wouldn't apply to that. So that's my concern. Just tossing all that out there.
So a few minutes ago, when I said I was in favor of this, I was only talking about linking to external content, not hosting it in any way on our site.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too. Maybe back to your point, that is the right answer, and to see if like having a site that like, hey, here's some really good articles that are out there and really good content. I still struggle with what belongs on a blog versus what belongs in our old tech docs sites. So I think that division haunts me.
A lot of this sounds like it's really relevant to the redesign of the community page. Sig Contribex and Paris Pittman, and the redesign of community into more of a contributor portal. So I think that there are options for linking to helpful content or linking to external content from Kubernetes.io, but it sounds like doing that from the documentation is not the best choice. That either like blogs, even social media, but maybe looking at a section for helpful external content to be included in the community page redesign, so that external content is available from the website, but not clearly not part of the documentation.
No, that was not my suggestion. My suggestion was let's have it be fine to link, from our docs, even from individual pages, to external content if we think there's value there. We can improve our infrastructure for detecting broken links. I think that's the other half of the story, is that those links will break, so we'll have to keep track of it. But anyway, that's my view. Is I think it's okay to just where we, you know, where we think it's helpful to go ahead and link out to an external piece.
Sure, and that seems reasonable. Yeah, it's. Go ahead.
I have one sort of boots on the ground story about this from a previous company where I worked, and I won't name names, but we had links in our official documentation out to an open source project's webpage, and their webpage was just hosted on an external URL. And eventually they moved where their webpage was and didn't let us know, and a domain squatter took their webpage and put porn content on the initial webpage, so we were accidentally linking out to a porn site. Like, just to be clear, like, that project's website and URL and everything was not porny or anything like that at all. It just was a thing that happened, and it came to our VP of Engineering's attention from an external person who reported it, and there was all kinds of yelling and gnashing of teeth about it until we did a postmortem and figured out what had happened, and it was totally out of our control. But this is one of the problems to linking to external content, is that the external content can change in ways that you don't expect. I'm not necessarily saying this as a reason not to link to external content, because it's the internet and that's the way that it works. But it's kind of just a cautionary tale.
Absolutely. All right. Well,
I think there's a step up from the linking out that we're sort of dancing around, which relates to, do we want to provide curated content? Do we want to have some awareness of what that content is? I think that makes sense for what is happening, especially within the contributor experience space. That's a possibility for that as we head down that. But that's also a much larger project that needs to be kind of thought through and thought out. Where I think where we are today is, yeah, let's go ahead and link to some external content, but let's use some best judgment and have some sort of means of saying, yeah, that's a good thing to do or not a good thing to do, that we start to develop internally.
And I think that's a conversation. I think anything to do with community redesign is really Sig Contribex's domain. That's their work and their choice. That's a conversation we can have with them. But yeah, I agree with Jared on this one. That let's avoid taking ownership, even if in a curation sense, of external content, because it's. I would argue that it's not related to our primary goal.
And I would just add that we don't have to do that kind of work right. We have you need resources we do not have and are not likely to have
exactly.
in the future.
Exactly. But at the same time, I also agree with Steve. I think that it, when it's useful, it is permissible, even good, to link to helpful content, with the understanding that that is not that sometimes that's a fraught exercise.
I liked Misty's cautionary tale, and it does seem to me as though to put that together with what you just said, Zach, exercising some judgment about domains that we link to, for example, could help mitigate.
Sure, but like Misty points out, domain squatters are opportunistic, and it happens to the best of us.
Right.
Right. So
I do think this sort of begs the question, and something that we might want to chat about in our upcoming summit is like defining our content strategy really clearly. Because I think this question is a perennial question, more than perennial. Sort of like, where is the boundary of Kubernetes in the outside world? Where is it? Where is it porous? Where is it very fixed? And let's define that.
Agreed. That's an excellent idea. All right, that is the end of our agenda. Anything else to add for the discussion today? All right, that's a SIG meeting. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.